MSW Media.
So yeah, now it's cleanup on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be cleanup on aisle 45.
Welcome to episode 208 of Cleanup on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, January 15th, 2025. I'm Allison Gill.
Hey, Allison. I'm Harry Dunn. We got a lot to cover today. The Justice Department has asked the court to deny George Santos' request to postpone his sentencing. George Santos, we haven't talked about him in a while, so let's get him involved. Problems with Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth's nomination. The Supreme Court refused to block Trump's sentencing in the hush money case, despite Trump spending time on the phone with Justice Alito, surprise, and Jim Jordan's star impeachment witness has been sentenced to 6 years in the slammer.
Oh, 6 years. Excellent. Plus, it just wouldn't be an episode of Cleanup on Aisle 45 without some Rudy Giuliani contempt. So we'll go over that.
That'll be fun.
As well as an update on the Fani Willis case, the Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays asking Merrick Garland for a copy of Jack Smith's case file, and the Capitol Police Chief opposing pardons of insurrectionists. But first, new loyalty interviews are being conducted in the White House National Security Council, and joining us to talk about this and to talk about incoming National Security Advisor Mike Waltz's plan to oust career intelligence officials is our good friend, national security expert, former Homeland Security and counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, and my good friend, Olivia Troye. Hey, Olivia, how are you today?
Hey, Liv.
Hi. How are you two?
Good. It's good to see you.
Thanks for joining us.
This is my first cleanup with Harry Dunn.
Well, in fact, this is my first time doing an interview where I'm the interviewer, not the interviewee. So look at this. We are experiencing new things together.
We are growing together.
Absolutely.
You're grown up and you're grown up and you're grown up, my friend.
Yes, indeed.
All right, Olivia, first question for you. How well do you know the incoming National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz?
I'm going to admit this. I know him pretty well. I have known him for quite some time, a few years now. I remember him from his Pentagon days as well. And turns out that he actually had my role in the vice president's office back in the day when he worked for Dick Cheney, when Cheney was vice president. He was Vice President Cheney's counterterrorism advisor. So we've had conversations along the way about the fact that we've held the same role.
Interesting. So you know him pretty well.
Yeah, I know his wife as well.
Well,
I was deployed with her in Baghdad.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, it's a family affair. And she worked in the Trump administration with me.
Oh my gosh.
And she had run-ins with Kash Patel.
Oh,
the stories we could tell.
Speaking of Kash Patel, has he responded to your lawyer's request for information that included a Monty Python meme?
Shout out to Mark Zaid. That was incredible badassery right there.
I think sometimes you just got to respond the way they deserve to be responded to and with, right? So he is not. So as far as we know, he is not filed. Go figure. So there's been no response to that.
Bark, bark, bark.
I second that.
Yeah, quite the interesting look for someone who wants to run the FBI to be going after people already. So
definitely. Well, Olivia, Edith Olmstead writes for The New Republic. Donald Trump's incoming National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, wants to get rid of all the non-political appointees and career intelligence officials on the National Security Council, so that the president-elect will be surrounded by loyalists and face absolutely zero accountability once he's in the White House. Waltz told Breitbart News Thursday that he hopes to oust career intelligence officials from the FBI, CIA, and the NSA, amongst other agencies from the NSC. These officials traditionally help the president make informed decisions about foreign and domestic affairs. Why is he doing this?
Yeah, I've got to say that I'm very disappointed that Mike Waltz would even go on the record and say this. I mean, I say disappointed because I would think better of him. He's someone who, is a military veteran. He's been in that public service domain of service to country, he very much well knows, having served in the vice president's office, in a national security role, how the National Security Council works. And it works in a very nonpartisan way. These are people who are experts in their roles in their fields, and it serves a function because of that, because it is there to truly serve the American people on national security matters. And so my biggest concern is that now they are going to move forward with the complete politicization of the National Security Council. And look, this started in Trump 1.0, right? I mean, this was something where they started purging the staff in 2020. They started reducing the directorates. They were screening personnel. They were looking for loyalists. I read something today that they've already started questioning people about, they're already going to start questioning people about who they voted for. I mean, these are not things that intelligence officers and military officers get asked in interviews, because that is not what the service does. And so, but I think this goes to show what the Trump administration agenda and national security apparatus will look like and how it will function. And, think about that. You're going to have Mike Waltz, apparently, who is now all in on this. By the way, this is also someone who posted a picture of himself, because I can't get this out of my head because I was so surprised. And I actually heard from Mike Waltz's own relatives who were appalled when they saw him do this. That, like, I think a year or two ago when he was running for re-election, he posted a picture of himself with like a dinosaur, full on MAGA and Trump. You have to look this up because it's kind of wild. And it was just so out of character for him, because I was like, what's going on with him? And so this is who he is now. I think it's dangerous when you combine that with Sebastian Gorka, who's going to be the head of the counterterrorism directorate. And combine that with a bunch of loyalists. I mean, this is concerning, because the National Security Council is supposed to be there to, advise the president in a non-partisan, unbiased way, whether it comes to foreign policy. I mean, what does it look like for domestic issues is my main concern. What does it look like for these wildfires? Because the National Security Council is actually the coordinator of that process when it comes to the emergency management and helping FEMA and the disaster declarations. So what we know that Trump tried to politicize, has been politicizing these things still today. We know that he withheld aid at times. We know that there were people like myself, and including Mike Pence and others, that had to weigh in on such issues along the way. So all of that, basically what happens is that it all goes away when you have a bunch of loyalists who only view it through a partisan lens and are basically only doing a loyalist agenda's bidding. And that's why this is so appalling.
That's scary.
It is. And let's talk a little bit about how it impacts national security. Alex Vindman, who has a little bit of experience with this, said in a statement, such an approach will have a chilling effect on senior policy staff across the government. Talented professionals wary of being dismissed for principled stances or offering objective advice will either self-censor or forego service altogether. This undermines the very purpose of the NSC to provide the president with the best possible advice, as well as the coordinating team to advance U.S. national security interests. And he goes on to say the implications of this loyalty above competence model are dire. By purging the NSC of apolitical experienced professionals, Trump and Waltz are hollowing out the institutional expertise required to navigate complex global challenges. It'll create a policy apparatus incapable of discerning sound policy from reckless impulse, or worse, one that actively disregards legal and ethical obligations to implement Trump's personal whims. So what's your take on, for your thoughts about what Alex Vindman has to say, and your take on how this approach will impact national security? You just mentioned FEMA, but this touches so many things.
Oh, I mean, it touches foreign policy, international relations. It touches domestic terrorism, international terrorism. I mean, foreign actors. It runs the gamut. It touches, cybersecurity. I mean, there is a directorate in the NSA that pretty much covers everything, and it's that is, and Alex Vindman is absolutely right. I have been in numerous National Security Council meetings throughout my career. I mean, we're talking probably over the course of my 20 years I've been coordinating with the NSC, and that is the function of it. And it works across the government, and it works across the intelligence community and law enforcement. And I think he's absolutely correct when he talks about the chilling effect. I am thinking about these executive orders that are going to hit day one of the Trump administration. I remember living that firsthand the first time around, a few days in, when the immigration executive orders hit, when the travel ban hit. And a lot of the discussions that were had in some of these meetings were, well, okay, if it comes to, you say that you want to stop travel from this country or ban this country, just keep in mind that the relationship for, national security reasons matters. And this is what that's going to have, the implications of that, what you're doing and how that impacts things. And I obviously can't get into the full details of that, but I say that as an example.
There's no more rule. Go for it, dude.
You're right, actually.
I was about to say, up is down, down is up.
You're right. There's classified documents in bathrooms these days, so what the hell do I care? But no, and I say that because the chilling effect is real, because I sat in meetings. I remember being nervous in these meetings, and that was nowhere near what this situation is going to be, right? I remember sitting with DOJ people who I knew were Stephen Miller allies. I remember sitting in these interagency meetings with representatives from different government agencies. That's how it functions. And I remember talking about whether it was a travel ban or talking about the refugee ceiling cap and why refugees matter, why we are pulling our weight around the world, the signal that we're sending to others and our allies and partners. All of these types of conversations happen in these policy meetings. And I remember thinking to myself, I know that there are some allies sitting in the backbench there. I know they're watching my every move. That is the chilling fact that Alex is talking about, because when you have nothing but partisan loyalists sitting at the table, and I say this because the people normally that were running these directorates, it's usually people that you've been working with throughout your career, right? They're longtime experts, or there's rotation. So they're usually people that you've crossed paths with along the way. You know them. You've worked on this policy issue. You're an expert yourself. It is a community and it functions. And that person becomes the coordinator for each directorate. That's what a senior director does. When you have partisan loyalists like this, Alex is right. Allison is correct. When you're sitting in these meetings and having these conversations, there is a certain level of trust that you're approaching it from the aspect of, like, what is the best thing for national security? The dynamic here is completely different of what people are going to face, right? You're walking into a room knowing that the objective is whatever that very partisan loyalist agenda is. And should you counter it, and you're seeing all your colleagues being purged and you're seeing people get fired and screened, that person is going to feel a certain amount of, like, well, can I speak freely? Can I just give the facts? Can I actually push back on this? And what does that mean for me tomorrow in my role? What happens to me when I go back to my department? What happens when I go back after this meeting and the person who's the head of my component or head of the agency gets a phone call saying so-and-so was in this meeting and you need to tell them to get in line, or they were out of line? I mean, for example, Olivia was in a refugee meeting, right? And she spoke up because Mike Pence, believe it or not, I mean, we were getting a lot of phone calls from some of the NGOs that really work on this issue who are very concerned. And when I spoke out in the meeting, I said, no, I think the vice president is against the reduction of the refugee ceiling. These are his reasons why. I have talked about covering that issue because I worked directly for the BP. It was different from others who came to me and said, we have concerns about this from the State Department, but can you raise the concerns? Because if I raise it, I'm going to hear about it when I get back, or the loyalist has arrived and they're going to, I don't know what's going to happen to me back at my agency. I'm giving those examples because that was a kind of dynamic that was starting to develop along the way. Picture that, and some of the people that lived it fully knowing that this is what's coming back again. And now picture that full of a room of people who are partisan loyalists that are running these meetings. And it is to the detriment of our national security that that's the case, because good national security policy exists on fervent debate and being able to have these honest discussions and then choosing the best course forward.
So Donald Trump isn't picking these people for their expertise. He's picking these people so they won't be obstructionists.
That's correct. And this comes, full circle when it comes to the deep state narrative that Kash Patel pushes and all these people that claim everyone is that. And that is, I can tell you that during the Ukraine impeachment, when all these narratives started to come up, I can tell you that many of us found it personally offensive to be called the deep state, because that was just, there's no reason to say that about us. Like, yes, did we hold the line at times, Harry Dunn, as you would say, or were we the guardrails at times? And we're like, hey, you can't do that. And this is why, and these are the implications if you do that. Or, hey, also that's illegal. You can't actually, do that. Or maybe don't use the military against the protesters, or maybe don't use. I mean, these are the conversations that happened, right? And again, this is what we were concerned about with Trump 2.0, was that those conversations are less likely to happen now.
Yeah, or Russia's interfering in this or whatever, and you're not going to want to talk about that. I know that was a very taboo subject in Trump 1.0. Just two more quick questions before we let you go. You mentioned earlier that these interviews are already taking place at the National Security Council, people asking who you voted for, going through social media. How does the incoming Trump administration have access to these employees? Is it through the transition team?
I'm assuming so. That the transition team has arrived and they're interviewing. I can imagine that they're also, quite honestly, I know how this works. They have probably arrived at the agencies and they have a list of who is in the White House currently and who's detailed there, as they're called detailees, when you belong to an agency and you're sent there. So they are on the agency's dime. So they have full access to those records. So they could be asking, like, who do you have currently serving on the National Security Council? And then they're reviewing who's there. They prepare like who they're going to rotate in and rotate out, because it does take time, right? There's paperwork. I don't know that anyone cares about that anymore in this incoming administration, but there is like billets and there's usually a fair process on how this kind of works. I expect that all to go out the window. So I think that that's kind of what's happening right now.
Yeah, he kind of did that in the time too. Like he was trying to put Carter Page and shit on the National Security Council.
Definitely remember that.
That's how we got Kash Patel the first time around. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And then finally, what would you say to Mike Waltz now, if you could talk to him?
I would say, I remember the conversation that we had on the rooftop of the Watergate Hotel when he told me to hang in there on Vice President Pence's staff, and that you were grateful that people like me and others were serving in our roles at the time during the first Trump administration, because you felt that we were the calming, prevailing influence and would be serving the greater good and helping Mike Pence navigate this challenging situation, knowing what Donald Trump is. And I would remind him of that conversation and say, I would ask him, I'd say, what happened to that Mike Waltz, who was so concerned about Donald Trump, what he was doing in national security and foreign policy. And I'd ask him to remember his comments to me about serving the greater good and public service and what we as national security people do in those roles.
Wow. Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Definitely.
It's been real eye-opening. Yeah, that's good. What happened to that Mike Waltz, honestly and seriously? We've seen a lot of people just go full MAGA and wonder, like, is this just for power, or do they actually believe this stuff? And it feels like he actually believes this stuff now. He's changed. And that's disconcerting, and it's probably very disappointing.
Yeah,
it is. And it's also, is he just saying it for these interviews because he's on right-wing media? But I don't think so, because he has entered a situation where, yes, he will be the national security advisor, but just keep in mind that the people in Trump's inner circle, which he is, trying to ingratiate himself into, is bigger than that. We're talking about, he is now dealing with the dynamic of people like Russ Vought. He's dealing with the dynamic of Stephen Miller, who is going to definitely be playing a major role when it comes to policy. And when it comes to policy, that means he will be overseeing the National Security Council as well. So he will have someone looking over his shoulder. And so I think that what I would like to believe that it's just bluster because he has to say it in right-wing media, but I don't believe that's the case, because I think he's going to have to implement it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much. And, we'll have you back on soon.
Well, that was depressing, wasn't it? Okay.
As we barrel toward January 20th.
Yeah. No, Liv, we appreciate you coming on. Appreciate your strength, your courage, and for standing up for what's right and always being a beacon of moral righteousness. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate you being a friend to us in the show. So thank you.
Thank you. Love you both. Take care.
Love you too. Everybody, stick around. We'll be right back.
All right, welcome back. That was a great talk that we had there. We have new patrons to thank today, including Reggie, Jana Highsmith, Robert Layton, Russell Bates, Natasha Sweeting, Terry, and Jag. Thank you all, Jag. I like that. Thank you all for supporting independent media. And speaking of patrons, Allison and I am so excited for this, will be hosting a happy hour question and answer for patrons of both the Daily Beans and Cleanup this Friday, January 17th at 4 p.m. Pacific. I like saying specific, Pacific, and 7 p.m. Eastern. If you want to become a patron and join us, you can sign up at patreon.com/IO45pod. Since everyone's quitting corporate news, we're blowing up and we could really, really, really use your support. So thanks again. And we could not do this without you. All right. Now, Allison, where do we go next? We got our choice, right?
We have a ton
of choices, right?
Yeah. And since we like to save Rudy for last, let's get some updates on some of the state cases against the attempt to overturn the 2020 election. First up, Chris Mays, the Arizona Attorney General, has written a letter asking Attorney General Merrick Garland to hand over all Jack Smith's case files on the prosecution relating to the 2020 presidential election. She notes that a recent order from the Maricopa County Superior Court has authorized this transmission, and she has asked for these materials before, like a while back, like when she first got to office. She asked the DOJ for this stuff, but DOJ said no because the case was ongoing. But now that it's ended, she's re-upping her request. As you know, Judge Cannon on Monday actually denied Nauda and De Oliveira's request to block the release of Volume 1. That's the
surprise there.
I'm right. I thought for sure she was going to link them together.
Absolutely.
And Volume 1 is the January 6th part of this report. And her initial injunction expired midnight Monday night. But we're recording this Monday afternoon, so we still don't have the report. But you might have a few more
hours. Yeah, we got a few more hours, and we'll see.
Yeah, we still don't know whether the Supreme Court is going to stick its corrupt nose into this and delay the release of the report until after January 20th, so it'll never see the light of day. But keep in mind, Clarence Thomas sits atop the 11th Circuit, and he can issue a temporary administrative stay all by himself if he wants. So by the time you hear this Wednesday, you'll know whether the report was released. But I don't know whether Judge Cannon's injunction or any subsequent Supreme Court shenanigans actually preclude Merrick Garland from sharing the case file with Chris Mays, since the case file is different from the final report. So we'll know soon enough. But
we'll stay tuned. We got a few more hours.
And she's asking for it again. And that would be a good way. I actually told Andy McCabe, I was like, can Jack Smith just give all this shit to all the state prosecutors to preserve it? Get it out of the DOJ? And he's like, yeah, they don't really tend to do that. I was like, yeah, but you should tend to try
for new norms.
Things.
I was about to say it's time for new norms, right?
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that update on the Arizona case. Now let's head over to Fulton County. Never a dull moment there for an update on the case there. First, the Associated Press reports that Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis has asked Georgia's highest court to review a lower appeals court ruling that removed her from the Georgia election interference case against Donald Trump and others. The Georgia Court of Appeals last month ruled that Willis and her office could not continue to prosecute the case because of an appearance of impropriety created by a romantic relationship she had with Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade, whom she had hired to lead the case. In a petition filed late Wednesday, Willis asked the Georgia Supreme Court to review and reverse that decision. The filing argues that the 2-1 ruling overreached the Court of Appeals authority, creating a new standard for disqualification of a prosecutor and disregarding decades of precedent. Even if the High Court eventually rules in Willis's favor, it seems unlikely that she will be able to prosecute Trump, who returns to the White House on January 20th. but there are 14 other defendants who still face charges in the case.
Yep. And in other Fulton County news, Fani Willis might have to pay attorney's fees to a conservative activist group after a hearing later this month. Willis was sued by Judicial Watch in March. The group alleged that Willis failed to comply with an open records request for documents and communications sent to or received from Special Counsel Jack Smith in the U.S. House January 6th committee. Superior Court Fulton County Judge Robert McBurney ruled Tuesday that Willis was in default for failing to comply with court deadlines. Willis was served on March 11th, and Judicial Watch filed the return of service March 13th. Willis was then required to answer within 30 days. McBurney said Willis did have legal action that she could have taken to challenge that deadline, but she did none of that. Quote, she never moved to open default on any basis, not even during the period when she could have opened default as a matter of right. She never paid costs, and she never offered up a meritorious defense. McBurney ruled that Willis had violated the Open Records Act by failing to turn over the records or even informing Judicial Watch of her decision to withhold some or all of the records. So, not good.
Not good. Yeah, not at all. But in other election interference news, there's a lot of stuff. See, we weren't lying when we said a lot to cover today. But the Supreme Court denied Donald Trump's bid to stop his sentencing in the hush money election interference case. As we know, Judge Merchan refused to throw out the 34 felony counts against Trump and ordered him to be sentenced January 10th. Donald Trump asked the Supreme Court to intervene, and they denied his motion. Trump was sentenced with an unconditional discharge on Friday the 10th, meaning he was giving no jail time, no fines, and no probation. Merchan had indicated in his ruling denying Trump's motion to throw out the entire case that he was inclined to impart the unconditional discharge sentence and allow Trump to appear virtually, which he did. This means that he will retain the convicted felon status pending his appeal of the case, which he must now fight while president.
Yeah. And, I know a lot of people are upset that there was no accountability. There was no sentence. But, Merchan is actually bound by the Constitution, which says you can't incarcerate a sitting president. I know a lot of folks were like, well, couldn't you just put him in jail for the weekend or something? I don't think that was one of the things that the DA was even asking for. So,
well, to answer their question, yes, he could have, I guess, right? He could have, but
he
that wasn't even on the table from the DA.
Yeah, the DA was like, no, we aren't going to put him in jail or anything. And in fact, the DA didn't even recommend to sentence him. The DA was like, can we just act like he died?
Yeah.
But then he wouldn't have gotten a chance to appeal, and he has a right to appeal, and that appeal is ongoing. But for now, he remains a convicted felon, and we can call him a convicted felon without being successfully sued for defamation. So, and it's also interesting that ruling to deny Trump's motion to stop his sentencing was 5-4 from the Supreme Court and not unanimous. The 4 justices that would have stopped his sentencing are Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Thomas, and Sam Alito. And speaking of Sam Alito, ABC's Catherine Falders reported last week that Supreme Court Justice Sam Alito spoke to Donald Trump by phone on Tuesday to recommend one of his former law clerks for a job in Trump's administration. The call occurred just hours before Trump's lawyers on Wednesday morning filed an emergency request with the justices asking them to block a New York judge from moving forward with sentencing Trump on Friday in the criminal hush money case. And Sam Alito not only failed to recuse because of this phone call, he actually voted to block Trump's sentencing after asking him for a favor. So the corruption is
literally quid pro quo, literally the definition of quid pro quo there.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that the 5-4 there, I saw somebody made a statement or a comment, and it made sense that Amy Coney Barrett, sided with the liberal justices here. And people were suggesting that her being around the other women in the court kind of bring her back down to earth, just the power of, those other powerful women of such high moral character on that bench. Is it rubbing off on Amy Coney Barrett? I mean, she sided with liberals in a few of the most recent decisions. So I'm curious. I mean, yes, she is who she is, right? But there's a little bit of hope there, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, she did side with Roberts to grant Trump immunity and crown him king back in July, but she was against the official act's evidence forthholding and joined the dissent on that. Also came up in the Fisher case and a couple of other things. Yeah, she is who she is, but I'd like to think it's the influence of the amazing liberal women on the bench.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite sure. But a lot of right wingers are extremely angry,
pissed at her,
calling her a traitor, saying she should be hung for treason and impeached and thrown off the bench and blah, blah, blah.
And I guess that's the point. I guess if anytime they are pissed off, we must be doing something right. So anytime they're having full meltdown over there, I guess we did something right and we got to win there. So even like I said, even though it's so incremental, it's so small, let's just hope it continues to, transform into something larger.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, we have a ton more news to get to, but we have to take another quick break. So everybody stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. All right, there's not going to be a lot of rhyme or reason to this block because there's so much news to cover. So we're just going to do a lightning round. I'm usually really talented at segues. There's just no tying most of these stories together, but we'll do our best. First up, we have some Senate confirmation hearings this week for Trump's junk drawer picks. But there's a few problems, specifically with Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard. I'll start with Tulsi. Republicans have been pushing to set a confirmation hearing for Gabbard before Trump takes office. But Democrats are pushing back because they haven't yet received key paperwork, including her background check from the FBI. How weird that the Republicans want to jam her nomination through before her background check comes in. The background checks that were delayed, by the way, because Trump refused to sign the transition paperwork because he said it had too many things in it about ethics.
Go figure, right?
But this Sunday, Senator Barrasso told CBS that Gabbard's hearing is being held up by, quote, a paperwork problem with the Office of Government Ethics. Quote, we had hoped to have the hearing later this week, but it looks like it's going to be the next week. That's what Barrasso said. He's a Wyoming Republican and the Senate Majority Whip, and he was talking to Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation. If the committee receives the paperwork by the end of this week, a hearing could still take place at the end of next week because they're required to wait a week between the time they get the materials and the time they have the hearing. Yeah.
But Gabbard's not the only one with paperwork problems. An FBI background check for Pete Hegseth, President-elect Donald Trump's pick to lead the Department of Defense, was transmitted late Friday to the leading members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, according to two sources with direct knowledge of the report, just days ahead of his Tuesday confirmation hearing, which is yesterday if you're listening Wednesday. The 25-member committee does not necessarily need to review Hegseth's background check to proceed with the nomination hearing, but two committee sources familiar with the process said it was unprecedented. We're living in unprecedented times, that the report took this long to get to the panel's top members. Democrats on the committee that NBC News spoke with have been frustrated by the delay and suggest that the FBI report may not be thorough, and particularly for a cabinet pick that has been entangled in controversy. One person who worked closely with Hegseth in the past and another who was contacted by Congress regarding Hegseth told NBC News that they are concerned the FBI has not reached out to them.
Yeah, usually the FBI would reach out to those people and interview them for a background check. So I don't know what Ray is doing besides resigning like a fucking chicken. Excuse my French on the public episode, but I'm tired of that. And, that figures. But speaking of unethical Republicans in Congress, Jim Jordan's...
we got a slew of them to choose from.
Yeah, we do. Jim Jordan's star witness, Alexander Smirnov, has been sentenced to 6 years in prison. Hey, how do you like that segue?
That's it. There you go.
I was like, how do I connect these stories? Through corrupt Republicans in Congress. This is from Marshall Cohen at CNN. The disgraced former FBI informant who was falsely accusing President Joe Biden and his son Hunter of taking a $10 million bribe from Ukraine was sentenced Wednesday to 6 years in federal prison. The ex-informant, Alexander Smirnov, who is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, has been in jail since his arrest last February. The sentencing in Los Angeles wraps up one of the final remnants of special counsel David Weiss's investigation into Hunter Biden and related matters. The only order of business that appears to be unsettled is Weiss's final report, which, per federal regulations, will be submitted to the Attorney General, who can then release it to the public. And I'm pretty sure nobody is going to try to stop that one.
Exactly. That's not going to go to the Supreme Court.
No, hell no. The plea deal said he would get between 4 and 6 years. Smirnoff wanted 4. The government wanted 6. The judge sentenced him to 6 years.
There we go. My segue. And speaking of criminals and unethical Republican members of Congress, there we go. That's a common theme. Like, we don't even need a segue. Let's just, that should be the name of this segment or whatever. Unethical members of Congress. Disgraced former Congressman George Santos' sentencing has been postponed by a judge. In a letter to the judge last Friday, Santos' attorneys said that their client is required to pay more than $200,000 in forfeiture money 30 days before he is sentenced. They said that through his podcast, Santos now has a viable path to making meaningful progress in satisfying his obligations, requiring only additional time for the quarterly compensation structure to generate sufficient funds.
Oh,
yeah, right. Wasn't he doing cameos too? Like, he was making money on cameos. They asked the judge to delay his sentencing from February 7th until a Friday in August, but the judge only moved it 10 weeks. Prosecutors had responded to the request for a delay in sentencing by saying Santos's claim of needing more time for the podcast to get off the ground were facially speculative and in any event, entirely insufficient to warrant such a lengthy adjournment. His request for a delay should be denied and sentencing should proceed as scheduled, they wrote. A delay to allow Santos to develop his podcast, the title of which is a tone-deaf and unrepentant reference to the crimes he has committed, is presumptively unreasonable. Allowing Santos to stave off sentencing specifically to monetize its infamy would send a message that, in fact, crime does pay, prosecutors wrote. Delaying sentencing would give him further time to grow his podcast listenership, would enable Santos to further use his criminal prosecution for personal benefit. So, all of that, he'll be sentenced on April 25th.
Describe your perfect date.
It's a tough one. I'd have to say April 25th, because it's not too hot, not too cold. All you need is a light jacket.
And a U.S. Capitol Police Chief Thomas, is it Manger?
Tom Manger, yeah.
Says that pardoning people who assault police would send a message that the safety of officers does not matter and could risk politicizing the law enforcement of violent protests. Manger declined to comment about President Trump's promise to grant clemency to many of the nearly 1,600 January 6 defendants, about 600 of whom were charged with felony assault or obstructing police during a civil disorder. But in his first public remarks as chief of the 2,300-member department on the broader subject, he decried what he said was the wiping away of accountability for attacks against law enforcement. Quote, "What message does that send? What message does that send to police officers across the nation? If someone doesn't think that a conviction for an assault or worse against a police officer is something that should be upheld, given what we ask police officers to do every day?" Trump's incoming administration could also drop charges against roughly 300 defendants still awaiting trial, about 180 of whom were charged with assaulting and obstructing police. The FBI has presented another 200 people for potential prosecution, including about 30% for the same offenses, according to federal prosecutors. Harry, what are your thoughts about his comments there?
You know, I was glad when I first saw that statement, because, you know, it's been the usual suspects, me and Michael Fanone and Sergeant Gannell out there saying, hey, this is wrong. And we've been begging other officers, organizations, specifically the Fraternal Order of Police, to speak out against this. Like, yeah, y'all clearly support Trump, but y'all support him pardoning the people that attacked police officers. And I'm glad our chief took a stand and made these statements. And I'm sure he will and has been criticized for his stance on that. But even J.D. Vance, as recent as this weekend, said that, you know, the people who assaulted police officers, they should not be pardoned. So I'm sure I'm sure that went over well.
He took it on the chin for that,
with his boss and the people in MAGA world. But yeah, assaulting, and that goes to the deeper point. The people that are in jail aren't people who trespass through the Capitol. Like these people that, let's be real, they misdemeanors got punished by, probation and fines and all that kind of stuff and having to pay restitution. That's what they were punished for. So the pardons for the individuals would be the people that are, they say, the ones that are sitting in jail are those oath keepers, are the Proud Boys, are the people who attacked police officers. So, yeah, I'm really glad that our chief made that stance.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see if Trump's Department of Justice and Pam Bondi continue with the additional prosecutions of I think there's 200 more people, 180 of them are accused of assaulting cops. Or obstructing the police. I'm interested to see if she goes forward with those prosecutions or if she's ordered to drop those cases. It's definitely a travesty. So it's good to hear him speak out, Manger.
Yeah, and also, like I said, and they also J.D. Vance. I can't believe I'm saying this, but good on him saying that the people that assaulted cops should not be pardoned. Good on him. And let's make sure that MAGA world knows that he said that, and he's I don't care if what backlash it causes. It's the right thing to say. It's the right thing to do. So
yeah, and let's hold him to it.
Yep, I'm glad you said that's the number one thing. Hold him to it because he's going to pivot in a minute.
Yeah, I know, right? All right, thanks so much for that. We have yet to talk about Rudy's contempt, and
this is going to be fun.
The little hat trick of contempt. We're going to talk about that right after this quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Y'all know what time it is. It's Rudy time. Let's start with his first contempt hearing in front of Judge Lyman for failing to hand over discovery in the Palm Beach condo case and for failing to hand over his assets to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. I mean, we can just keep going. And this, and that, and that. NBC reports a federal judge in New York has found former Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani in contempt of court for not complying with orders to turn over information about his assets to a pair of former Georgia election workers he defamed. We know them as Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman. U.S. District Court Judge Louis Lyman made the contempt finding Monday afternoon after Giuliani testified over 2 days to answer questions about why he failed to hand over assets and court-ordered discovery information. Lyman said the defendant has attempted to run the clock by stalling. He said he'd ruled on an appropriate sanctions against Giuliani later. Giuliani testified remotely earlier in the day from his Florida home, telling his lawyer, Joseph Camarata, that he had tried to comply with court orders in the case and blaming earlier failures to do so on his previous attorney. It wasn't my fault. My attorney did it. Yeah. He also complained that he has had difficulty juggling his various court cases. Of course you did, including 2 criminal cases and 2 other defamation suits related to his attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Giuliani said Friday that the DiMaggio jersey was missing and denied an assertion made by a friend, Monsieur Alan Placa, that he had seen it and framed in Giuliani's property in Palm Beach, Florida within the past 2 years. Like his friend said, no, it's not. I just saw it. It's in your house, dude. On Monday, Giuliani said he's still searching for the jersey. I don't know where it is, and it's hard to recreate who took it, and I am personally conducting my own investigation about this, he said. You go get him, Rudy. You get that investigation. Testifying in court Friday, Giuliani denied having withheld other Yankees memorabilia, saying he wasn't hiding a signed image of Reggie Jackson, another Hall of Famer that the election workers' attorney said was listed as an asset in bankruptcy court. A trial will be held in the New York case on January 16th to determine the status of Giuliani's Florida condo and possession of his Yankees World Series rings, which he says he gifted to his son years ago.
I bet he's not going to be able to prove any of that.
Yep.
And the fact that the sanctions, the Judge Lyman also entered an order of adverse inference, where he's going to tell the jury that the Florida condo is not his primary residence. So it's not going to go well for him. But that's not all, Harry. Rudy had a second contempt hearing on Friday in front of Judge Beryl Howell for continuing to defame Freeman and Moss. And guess who was there?
I was. I was there. I got to be in the courtroom. You know, it started out as a day to go to the courthouse to start to support Sergeant Gannell for his testifying about people that assaulted him. That court case got postponed. So I was like, you know what? I got time. Let's go sit on these Rudy cases. And Judge Beryl Howell had a full docket that day. She had a couple criminal cases in D.C., plea deals, sentencings, all that stuff. So finally, it was time for Rudy. And Rudy came in the courtroom and he wobbled in there like the penguin himself. Rudy had supporters in the courtroom. There were people in there from MAGA world. And I didn't know, but I knew it because I saw, people had they have their paraphernalia on. And so, but I didn't know who any of these individuals were. I found out who they were shortly after the court case. Apparently, I was sitting next to an individual who made history by being removed off the New Mexico ballot for insurrection. His name is the Cowboy
Couey Griffin.
Couey Griffin. And apparently, I was sitting next to him, and he's telling his supporters that I was sitting next to Harry Dunn and confronted him. This guy didn't look my way. He didn't say anything to me, but they have to make it look, right for their base and their supporters and their followers. But sitting in that courtroom, I was so not impressed. I paid attention mostly to Judge Howell. She was done with Rudy Giuliani. She was so fed up with him. She was scolding him from the bench. And she said, at one point, Mr. Giuliani, you are the most famous person in this courtroom. You have the biggest audience. And you are continuing to defame these women. And Rudy is like talking back to her. No, I'm not. No. And he's like grumbling at the desk, and he's flustered. He's throwing his hands in the air, and he's shaking his head no to everything that she says. And I just knew at that moment she was going to sit like, you know what, you're in contempt right now. But the attorneys for Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman, I believe, put on a clinic and batting down every argument that Rudy has put him forward. Some of the funny things that we've read here on this show. But it was really good. And as you'll talk about it further, she found him in contempt.
Yeah, she did. And even leading up to the hearing, Rudy actually wrote a letter asking for permission to attend remotely.
Yeah.
Saying he's got too many medical problems to be there in person and that Iran is trying to assassinate him. But Judge Howell called his bluff. She issued a minute order, and it said, upon consideration of Rudy's motion to appear virtually for the scheduled contempt hearing on January 10th, and to assess the seriousness and veracity of the medical conditions, i.e. severe knee conditions, a lung condition that requires the use of an inhaler, and a heart condition, and his security concerns, i.e., quote, credible death threats, unquote, that this motion, without support from any medical or other documentation, asserts, provide good cause and compelling circumstances to excuse his in-person attendance at the scheduled contempt hearing. So she directed him to file by January 9th at 2 p.m. a sworn declaration under penalty of perjury from Rudy Giuliani that, except for travel required for court proceedings, he has been unable to travel and has not traveled from his residence in Florida in the past 30 days, and that he remains unable to and will not travel anywhere else in the next 30 days, the period from December 9th to February 7th, 2025, due to these same medical conditions and security concerns. So no inauguration for you if you don't show up in my court.
That's fair, though. I think what Judge Beryl Howell did, that's very fair. She said, you know what? Those reasons that you gave are very valid. You're 100%, Mr. Giuliani. Prove it.
Yeah.
That's it. And prove it just by saying a sworn affidavit, like not getting a doctor, nothing, just swear under penalty of perjury.
Yeah, and knowing full well he was just in a courtroom. No, he appeared virtually.
And Judge Lyman. Yeah.
But he caved and he showed up in court, like you said. And as expected, like you said, it didn't go well for him. This is what NBC says. A federal judge Friday found former Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani in contempt of court in the defamation case against him involving Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. The second such finding this week. The ruling by U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell in Washington over additional defamatory comments made by Rudy comes just days after U.S. District Judge Louis Lyman found him in contempt for failing to turn over financial information he'd been ordered to provide. Giuliani, Howell said, engaged in the worst kind of defamation against the mother and daughter, which led them to being forced from their jobs and homes due to the avalanche of death threats Giuliani touched off with his repeated false claims. Howell ordered Giuliani to submit a sworn declaration in the next 10 days that he has reviewed all the evidence in the case, including testimony from the plaintiffs, that he and his attorneys had an opportunity to attend the depositions in the case, and affirm that he understands and acknowledges that all the sworn testimony in the case refutes his allegations of election fraud against the pair. If he does not do so, he faces a $200 a day fine until he complies. If he hasn't done so within 30 days, the judge said she could increase the amount of the fine, and future violations, she warned, could lead to jail time, which is, she's mad because Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss weren't even asking for jail.
Yeah. She appeared very, very on the side of Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. She was very frustrated with Giuliani's, comments. So
yeah, because he directly violated her court order. At the start of Friday's hearing, an attorney for the two women, Michael Gottlieb, told the judge, "We don't want to be here today. The main thing the plaintiffs want is for Giuliani to stop defaming them." And he asked the judge to fine Giuliani $20,000 for each violation from financial assets that are off limits to his creditors, like his IRA account, saying he believed that penalty would be sufficiently steep. The contempt motion came after Giuliani made comments on his podcast to continue to claim the women committed fraud during the 2020 election. We went over that last week. Howell told Giuliani he needed to be mindful of his platform and the power of his words. Yeah. And here's what you said, Harry. She said, "You're the most famous person in this courtroom right now. You got a bigger audience. You've got a bigger public following than anyone in this courtroom." And Giuliani's attorney, Eden Quainton, noted that Giuliani had abided by the agreement for several months before his live stream comments in November. Quote, "So because he was good for a few months, we ought to excuse any bad behavior after that?" Howell questioned. She was similarly unmoved by his argument that Giuliani did not demonstrate malice in his claims on his show, since he truly believes Moss and Freeman committed election fraud, despite multiple investigations by Republican officials in Georgia that found that they didn't. Quote, so what you're saying, this defamation is never going to stop? He's never going to stop saying this because he thinks he's right? That's chilling," she said. Quainton said that that wasn't the case and argued the $20,000 figure for future violations would be excessive. So, contempt.
Yeah. It's so funny. I was struck by the point when he said in there he believes the stuff that he's saying, so it's not defamation. So I'm glad that the judge, came up with the agreement that she did. Giuliani was called to the stand to talk about his finances and complained that Freeman and Moss had an army of lawyers working for them. Gottlieb responded that Giuliani currently has 9 lawyers from 8 law firms working for him, which Giuliani said was flatly untrue. The judge, get this, the judge then asked how many people in the courtroom worked for Giuliani and identified a number of people. Giuliani blasted the judge before the hearing even started, complaining in a post on X that the hearing was starting late and she was making us wait all day for her inevitable, highly prejudiced, usual biased decision. Now, I can't say it did take a long time, but she didn't make them wait. There was a business before the court that was on the docket that took time.
You got to wait like everybody else.
Yep. There was a person that was scheduled for a 9:30 hearing whose hearing didn't start till noon.
Yeah.
Everybody had to wait. Giuliani goes on to write, "The hearing is a hypocritical waste of time and a disgusting example of Biden lawfare." Giuliani wrote that minutes before the proceedings began. Giuliani has said that his comments on his show weren't defamatory and that it is my First Amendment right to talk about the case and my defenses. I think you do a better, Rudy. His attorney argued in a court filing that the remarks were vague because he didn't identify the women by name.
Yeah, but he was pointing to a video of the women and talking about it while he said it. Like, dude. Anyway, well-deserved contempt. You and I have been expecting this decision from both.
I'm glad that it's here too.
Yeah, me too. And we'll see if he complies with that 10-day order. And after 30 days, if he still hasn't complied, she could put him in jail.
Yeah. But I like that remedy, though. I like the remedy that the judge has set forth. You know what, Rudy? You believe this? Okay. I'm going to have you review stuff to say, you know what, this is true and what's not true.
And you're going to have to sign an affidavit saying that you understand it, that you're wrong.
This is true. So now you don't have any excuse. You can't use that excuse, I believe it to be true, anymore.
Yeah. Watch him submit it without signing it or something. He's just going to continue to be a dick. His trial starts tomorrow on his Florida homestead fame.
Can't wait to talk about that one.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting if he goes on the stand to defend himself like the idiot that he is. I'm assuming his lawyers are begging him not to. But he's failed to hand over any, mostly what they were looking for was evidence that his staff and people who work for him were in Florida since July 2023 because he's claiming that's his primary residence. So it'll be interesting. He won't be showing up to the inauguration in the 1980 Lauren Bacall Mercedes-Benz because
we can count on that.
Rudy Freeman and Shay Moss have it now.
Absolutely.
And he won't be able to stay in his New York apartment when
I am here for that.
when he's up there too. All right, everybody, thank you so much. And a huge, giant thank you to Olivia Troye for coming and talking
Liv,
to us.
Yeah, that was very good.
Mm-hmm. And, we'll see you on Friday if you're a patron of the Daily Beans and Clean Up 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 Eastern. We'll send you a link to that Q&A.
There's still time for people to sign up, right? Is there still people to sign up?
Yeah, you can become a patron now.
As soon as you become a patron, you can join in, and we're going to be interacting with you all, talking, having cocktails and mocktails for those in dry January
or just
proof. A dry life. Yeah, zero proof spirits.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. There's time for everybody to sign up on the Patreon /Aisle45.
Yeah, patreon.com/Aisle45pod, AISLE45POD. And you can also join the Daily Beans, patreon.com/MillerSheWrote. So I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be loads of fun. We can just, toast each other and laugh at Rudy.
I did see people that don't listen to our bonus episode won't get it, but I did get to see some recipes for some old fashions that some people put in there. So thank you all for sharing. I'm looking forward to trying a few of them.
Yeah, there's an apple jalapeno.
I saw that one.
Something.
That one looks intense, but let's give it a try. Why not?
Looks interesting. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. We'll be in your ears again this weekend for the bonus episode if you're a patron, and we'll see you on Friday if you're a patron. Otherwise, we'll see you next week on the public episode. Thanks so very much. Do you have any final thoughts, Harry?
No, everybody hang in there. We're going to be here. It's going to be a long 4 years, but we promise we aren't going anywhere. So we need y'all to do the same. Stick in there and hang in there and be tough. And we got each other's backs.
Yep, we gotcha. All right, we'll talk to you next week. I've been Allison Gill.
Harry Dunn. See you Friday, y'all.
Clean Up on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill, with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Clean Up on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.